Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so if you're watching this on Monday, we're recording this on Sunday after some crazy games. The NBA regular season is done. The playoffs are on the way. First, we do have the play-in, but first we're actually going to talk about a few meaningful games, right, that kind of ultimately determine the standings. In the Eastern Conference, actually on Friday, the bracket had already been set, right? So, and we'll get into the bracket, I guess, probably towards the end of the episode after we get through these other games. But the Western Conference still had a ton that needed to be locked up, right? The Lakers, I believe, on Friday or whatever, they were able to grab the 3 seed by getting a win over the Rockets. The Rockets rested most of their main guys. I think Jalen Green played in the first half. And then the Nuggets won out their remaining schedule, as did the Clippers. We'll get into that. But we had a few more seedings that had to be decided before we got on, and that was basically everybody from 4 through 8, right? Because I know the Grizzlies were locked into 8, but they are in the play-in, so there is a chance for them to move up to 7. But we still had every seed after the 3 seed not completely clinched. I guess Sacramento and Dallas had clinched 9 and 10 respectively. But basically, the Nuggets, they won the game over Houston. Houston did play their guys, but you knew that the Nuggets were going to have to go in to that game and make sure that they came out of there with a win, because there was a possibility that if they had lost that game, they would have fallen, I think, down to the 6th seed potentially. And the Rockets did play their guys. They didn't play them as much as you would normally think. I mean, they played most of their guys like a little over 20 minutes. So they were kind of, I think, more so just trying to get the rust off, because they had sat the last couple of games. So you went in knowing that the Nuggets were going to win. And now the Nuggets, I believe, are undefeated since Michael Malone got fired again. That's good for them. Get some momentum going into the playoffs. Jamal Murray still looks kind of rusty, so they're going to need him to probably be, A+, close to that if they want to be able to make a deep run. But at the very least, they were able to, get that win. But we don't really have to talk about that unless you want to, touch on it a little bit.
I mean, kind of similar stuff to what you said. Definitely needed, I think, a little bit of momentum. Give yourself, that energy boost. And, obviously we already know that they were pretty much almost guaranteed a spot here. But at this point, you really just need to take the week off and really just try and lock in and get ready for the playoffs, because it's going to be tough.
And then Minnesota just needed to get a win over Utah. They had a relatively lax group of games towards the end of the season. They got the win. They were 20-something point favorites to win that game, which, we don't bet. But generally, if you have an over-under that high, try to take the under. And they ended up doing what they needed to do in order to pull it out. It was kind of close, kind of competitive, but, you knew that they were going to win that one. Don't have to say too much about that. They were able to clinch a top 6 seed, and they are 6. But the big game of the day, probably should have started with it, but the big game of the day was Clippers Golden State. And this was a monumental game with massive implications because of the fact that basically loser would fall into the play-in. Winner stays in the top 6, depending, and where they would fall would depend on some of these other teams. But basically, because this game went on longer, because it went into overtime, pretty much Clipper win would mean 4 seed or 5 seed for them. Golden State win, 6 seed for them. And we ended up getting the Clippers winning this game 124-119 in overtime. This was a classic end of regular season game. This was the game of the day. And we knew it would be a big game because of the fact of the implications. And it was kind of funny because early on, the Clippers, looked pretty solid early on. Kind of, Kawhi being able to do his thing. The Warriors didn't really have much of an answer for him. Kind of ran out of gas, I guess, a little towards the end. But either way, he was fantastic. But it was kind of funny because a big part of this game early on for a decent chunk of the game was a lot of the time when Steph was out there was kind of when the Clippers were able to play their best basketball. Whereas when he was off the floor, right, there were long stretches where the Clippers could not get anything going offensively, and the Warriors basically had like these all defense lineups in where it's like Jimmy and Draymond and Peyton, and just everybody, and just forcing the Clippers into a lot of really bad turnovers. And this is something that's kind of been a problem for the Clippers all year. They don't have a lot of great ball handlers, and most of their ball handlers aren't super athletic, super quick. I mean, I guess Powell's kind of like a physical guy that's got a decent first step, but these are guys where they're kind of, I think, a little bit prone to kind of turning the ball over if they get pressed up, which you saw for a lot of the game. It was kind of a low-scoring game for a little while. But then in the second half, Steph was able to get his offense going, especially in that fourth quarter and overtime, where he just, made shot after shot after shot. Unfortunately, you could kind of see towards the end, he ran out of gas. He had 8 turnovers, including some really costly ones at different points. Don't really want to blame him because it's a team game, obviously, and you give main credit to the Clippers. Harden was great, 39, 10, and 7. Didn't really know what to expect from him because he's, been a guy that has a reputation for not always showing up in big games. But this was a big game, and he stepped up to the plate. Chris Dunn was kind of the main defender on Steph. Obviously, Steph still ended up having 36, but it was a very difficult 36. There were not a lot of easy buckets in this game from him. Those are kind of the shots that you kind of want him to take, but he's capable of making them. Zubac was great, 22 and 17. He's been a problem for them all year, where he's able to be out there and take advantage with his size and still kind of able to find ways to get going around the basket. Not a great game from Norman Powell, but it was made up by some of the other guys. Got almost nothing from the bench. The bench was pretty atrocious for the Clippers at different points in the game. Bogdan Bogdanovic was getting hunted relentlessly. Yeah. Simmons had an offensive rebound at one point, but minus 11 didn't really do a whole lot. No points. I mean, he is what he is. But then you look over at Golden State's side. Jimmy Butler had 30 points, right? So he stepped up in a big way. He had a lot of baskets that were like breakaway, buckets off the break off of defensive plays. Got to the line a decent amount. But he showed up, right? He had it right. They needed him. Draymond had some big moments, 4 of 6 from 3, 14 points, got a key stop on Kawhi at the end of the fourth. Even Pods, right, had like a really good game where he had 19 and 7, 4 and 2. Hit some big shots for them, including some interesting shots. But, that's kind of what happens at the NBA level. Moody was pretty quiet. I think he was mainly out there for some point of attack defense at times, and he was decent. 3 steals, 2 blocks, but he didn't really do a whole lot on the offensive end, and that was kind of problematic because that's kind of where his biggest value is his ability to hit those threes. And then Golden State's bench didn't really give him a ton. I mean, he'll hit a couple threes early, predictably, didn't hit anything down the stretch. Peyton gave them some rebounds, but not really a whole lot, and Post gave them basically nothing. And then at the end of the game, of course, we know what happened, right? They tried to get off a 3 with Buddy Hield, who wasn't in the game for most of it, and then just comes in. It's a good 3-point shooter, but again, it's kind of hard to trust a guy like that because he's had a lot of moments in the season where it feels like every big shot they need, he just isn't there. And this was kind of a worst case scenario for Golden State in a way because, once again, the Spurs kind of ruined another team's season because last year, we know what happened right between them and the Nuggets where Devontae Graham gets a game winner. Yeah. And that knocks the Nuggets to the 2 spot. And then they're in that same bracket with Minnesota, and they end up losing to Minnesota in the second round. Golden State doing pretty well. Had a chance after they beat the Lakers to move up to 3, possibly. Then Harrison Barnes hits a fadeaway game winner, which I've seen some clips where they've showed there was like a compilation of game winners where he's hit that exact same shot, which is kind of interesting, kind of funny. Didn't do it when he was on the Kings against Golden State, but that's okay. But now he basically put him in the play-in. Now Golden State's going to have to fight for their lives. And Jimmy Butler at the end of the game, he was limping. He looked, like he was clearly hurt. There was a play where Kawhi drove. Looked like he got fouled. Maybe he didn't. But, so it's like kind of a 50-50 call. It was kind of a physical game where they, for stretches, let a lot go. But it looked like he got hurt. I guess he kind of landed awkward. I guess Kawhi kind of landed on him awkwardly, right?
Their knees kind of collided, and they
exactly.
it was like Kawhi's upper kneecap, like kind of hit Jimmy's upper kneecap.
Right.
It was,
Right. It was like one of those, like you said, knee to knee hits, right? Which is never great. So
Hmm.
hopefully he's doing okay. But it's kind of a worst case scenario where they had a ton of great momentum coming off the Butler trade. Then you basically have one too many rough games right at the end where now you're in the play-in and you're going to have to fight for your lives. Now, maybe it's not the worst case scenario potentially, only because you're going to play Memphis. They've had their number. Everybody's had Memphis's number. They've not been very good against good teams. Can't really guard anybody. But you just never want to be in that position because you don't want a scenario where what if Memphis just has a magnet ball game, right?
Hmm.
Where just every three just goes in,
Hmm.
doesn't miss. Because we saw this last year with Golden State, different team, obviously, but we saw that last year, right? Where everybody for Golden State in that playing game against the Kings, where we all thought they would win, they all played horrible. And then Keegan Murray all of a sudden is the best player on the floor. That's like a 1 in 100 type scenario, but it happened
Yeah.
and it ended their season. So it's pretty rough for them. But you could also make the case of, well, as long as they win this playing game, they'll play Houston, and that's probably of the higher seeds the team you want to play the most because of the fact that you're going to have the best player on the floor in that series, maybe the best two. But they're also a wild card because we know physically that's the type of team that Golden State may struggle offensively a little bit with, right? Like we saw, it's one game, but we did see a little bit of a preview, right, where Amen Thompson was guarding Steph, really limited him. Now, is Steph going to have 3 points in a playoff game? Probably not, right? But, it's not a great scenario to be in because you just never want to be in the play-in the first place. And it's tough because, again, you look at it, 7-3 in their last 10. We know they've been fantastic since the Butler trade, but a lot of these other teams were able to finish strong because look ahead of them. Minnesota, 8-2. The Clippers were 9-1 to finish the season, right? Now the Nuggets were 5-5, but they won 3 in a row to close it out, right? And some of those teams have the tiebreakers, and it's just not an ideal situation to be in. So now they're in the play-in again, back-to-back seasons. But the good news is that they'll be at home, where they have been. I mean, I guess never mind. They have the same record as at home as they do on the road, 24-17. But either way, that means they're a good home team. So that means that, and you're playing the Grizzlies, who, like I said, I don't think have much in the tank against this type of team. You just don't want a scenario where Butler might be hurt. You limp into the playoffs with an older team. You're going against a physical, athletic team. And we know, the stuff that Udoka said, about Golden State. So we know that he's going to have those guys prepared. But either way, it's not a great scenario to be in, I don't think. Because, again, I'm not saying that they're going to lose 2 straight playing games and miss the playoffs. I don't think that's going to happen. You just don't want to be in that situation because ideally you want the time off. You get a week off to rest and play your matchup. But that's the tough part of them kind of going into the deadline with the record they had, right? Because you had to do a whole lot to get to this point, right? And then you had just a couple of bad games because 7-3 is really good, right? But those 3 losses pretty much put you right back in the play-in, which is where you didn't want to be. So now they're going to have to, instead of getting time off, a whole week off, you have to, you stay at home, I guess, but you got to play another game. Then after you get done with that playing game, assuming you win, then you got to go back on the road and go to Houston to play, a hot, young, hungry team.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I think there is a lens where you kind of can
Mm-hmm.
look at it from the perspective of, well,
Sure.
you know, did you really want to play LA in the first round? I know that's been a lot of,
Right.
discourse, and I'm not saying they clearly did not lose this game on purpose. Like you said, it really was
No,
the perfect,
they wanted
ramp.
to win. Both
Yeah,
teams wanted.
exactly. It was a perfect ramp up really for the play-in slash playoffs because of that intensity and that hunger for that win because nobody wants to be in the play-in. But I think, if you are the play-in favorite, it's not the worst thing in the world because I think they would probably rather play, a team like Houston who maybe is a little bit more vulnerable, in the
Mhm.
first round than play, like I said, the Lakers who, number one are, loaded with talent, but also they're so good at home. Like LA is going to have that home court advantage, and it's that's
Mhm.
nothing to really scoff at. So I do understand that perspective, but I think there is a lens where you can look at it that way. But
Sure.
overall, the game was kind of crazy. I can't lie.
Oh
Like I
yeah.
said, really felt like the perfect ramp up, and that's the beauty of the playoffs and the play in is you get you know these little games where everything is just kind of going perfectly for almost 2 hours, in one game, and you
Mhm.
got some really great performances from both teams, and the box score I think tells you all you really need to know. Like the benches really didn't do a whole
Nope.
lot. So they relied on all their starters, all their core guys, and that's really what the playoffs come down to. And
Yeah,
I don't remember what we said about in terms of predicting how that game was going to end. I think
we
I
did not. We did not. I
yeah,
think I think what I said was I expected Golden State to get the 6th seed, so that kind of implicitly meant that I probably thought they were going to win this game,
yeah,
which they
me
did
too.
not. So
I,
I
I
guess
thought they
I'll
were
take
winning.
that one.
I thought they were winning
And
it
that's
too.
yeah, and that's why nobody knew what was going to happen
Yeah,
because I think there were a lot of people who were anticipating a Golden State win, which would mean a first round matchup between them and LA. Not going to happen. Maybe it happens in the second round, right? Because
yeah.
if Golden State wins that 2-7 matchup, if they win that first playing game, and then the Lakers win their 3-6 matchup, that could happen. What did you make of Kaminga, a
Mm-hmm,
DNP
mm-hmm.
in the biggest game of the season? And there have been some conversations, right, where I think Steve Kerr had kind of basically said that he didn't feel like the Jimmy, Draymond, Kaminga combo didn't work, right? He mentioned like he just didn't believe in it at all, which you usually don't hear a coach say out loud. But I think it's interesting how, again, the biggest game of the season, I mean, this is his 4th season, right? He was going into the season hoping for a big role, big money. And again, maybe he plays in the next few games, but DNP, right? Quentin Post gets 10 minutes, does basically nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, even like a Buddy Hield, I guess, he's out there for his 3-point shooting and he hit some threes early on. But what did you make of that? Because that doesn't really give you a great sign where, a guy that, feels like you would kind of like to have, you didn't have. And like you could kind of, and again, they still ended up winning the game, but you do kind of feel like when he's not out there, there is kind of an athleticism deficit a little bit. They're smaller, but he's also, if he's not going to be crazy productive, right, then it's kind of hard to not play him. But it does feel like a major letdown just because, again, it's a guy that was drafted, 7th overall. Again, he's not a rookie. Didn't really, and he hasn't really played a whole lot in any of, right? Because he didn't play at all his rookie year. Makes sense. He's a rookie. They didn't need him. But you would think the second year, right? He didn't really play much either. Because I remember, even in the playoffs, right? When they were kind of struggling at points, he never got really minutes. I think he might have played a little bit against the Kings, but he didn't play at all against LA. And then, this year, he started, didn't play great, came off the bench. I think the big thing is it's just not a good fit.
Yeah, I
And it's
agree.
just not a great outside shooter. Also, I think just a guy who processing wise, I think doesn't fit this type of style where it's a lot of read and react,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of motion. And there are some things he can do, like he can cut obviously and roll because he's a great athlete, but he's also a guy that seems like he likes to kind of have the ball in his hands, try to find ways to score. And I think there's a lot of skepticism about can that work in a playoff series? But I'd be a little bit worried if you don't have a guy like that, just because because then you don't have as much scoring depth. You don't have as much athleticism, and maybe this is a one time thing, but you would think you'd be pulling out all the stops to try to win this game, so that way, like you said, even if you play the Lakers in the first round, you probably would still rather that than be in the playoffs. But I also understand, like you said, from your perspective, it may not be the end of the world because you'll just play Houston in the first round. Can probably find minutes for him against the Rockets because that's also a young team.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. That was kind of a, it doesn't give you like great confidence that either A, he'll be back, or B, even if he is back, how impactful is he going to be? And, you could just, it just felt like it was too much of some of the core guys. He just needed one more guy. And Kaminga, in theory, should be that guy, especially coming off the bench. And you just had no one. I mean, it was basically guys that kind of have to play off everyone else, and it just didn't work. And it could have, but, then the Clippers, those guys were able to get their own buckets, at different points. And the Warriors kind of struggled outside of Steph, kind of bailing them out.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I don't think there's any trust between Kaminga and the coaching staff. Number
Yeah.
one, like you said, not a good fit at all. He really, honestly, fits the mold of more like a Houston team or a team like that, where it's like they like to do a lot of paint mashing and stuff. And you look at this game, I think it's a perfect showing of why the Warrior system works so well. Look at how
Mhm.
Jimmy Butler got so many of his points. Look at how
Right.
Steph got a lot of his points. It's a lot of off ball stuff, and you have to have an IQ as well. You can't. I'm not saying Jonathan Kuminga doesn't have an IQ. I'm just saying there's
Sure.
levels to it. Like
Yeah, I got
Draymond, he may not be the greatest player of all time, but he's definitely a smart basketball player. He knows how
yeah.
to make a freaking read. So does Jimmy Butler. He knows how to when to slip and when not, things of that
Mhm.
nature. So I don't know if Kaminga has that ability yet in terms of, and it might not even be his fault because he doesn't really have a whole lot of experience on the floor like that, and his raw numbers, you would be like, wow, that's a solid rotational piece. But I think if you watch them this season and you watch them night in, night out, you kind of are scratching your head at why he didn't play. That's why I think, there's more to it than just, ball. I think it's a little bit of politics and lack of trust between the two. Because I mean, we've seen them go back and forth in the past couple of years, right? Like
Oh
publicly
yeah.
calling each other out. So I don't think there's really a way that you can go forward. But a DNP is freaking wild on the last game of the regular season, arguably the most important game of your season.
And it's also tough because it kind of feels like, well, if that's the case, you should have traded him because,
Facts.
you know, instead of you could have had potentially some role player, and he doesn't make a lot of money. So you probably couldn't necessarily like, if you couldn't just put him into the Jimmy trade because it'd be the same return.
Yep.
Maybe you get an extra guy, but
Hmm.
that's probably why you probably should have moved him because you can't have a guy like that just being a DNP. And again, we understand his flaws and in terms of why you just may not feel confident about him in a playoff series.
Yeah.
But it just feels like it would have been nice to have an additional guy in that spot. And they didn't really have anybody else to make up for it. And it just felt like it's kind of to the point where it's almost like too much of your stars. And that's kind of, in theory, what does happen in the playoffs. But then it got to a point where you just saw in the overtime and late in the fourth quarter, they just started swarming Golden State. And, the turnovers, how many did they have? Like 15, which isn't a ton, but most of them came late into the game,
Yes.
right? I think Steph had like what, maybe 3 or
I
4
believe it was
on his
3.
own.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He
and
got
like
ripped
again,
and then he threw it out of the double team, and I can't remember the
right.
other one.
Yeah, and not having that type of guy who can do some damage near the rim, and it's not that Butler can't, but just a guy who can be even more forceful and a really, really good athlete. And Butler had some dunks in this game. It's just it would have been nice to have one more guy. And, that's kind of the argument for why Golden State can win the West for sure, but that's why it's probably hard for them to win the West and also maybe get the title because it still feels like you're going to need some additional guys to fill out this rotation, especially going into next season. Again, we can't just write them off like their
Yeah.
season's done
Yeah.
because they could easily win the playing game, win the first round, still make the conference finals. It just didn't. You just kind of left with like a weird feeling. But again, it was a tie game, right? It was a tie game late in the fourth quarter. So either team could have won. It was literally a coin flip game. But, it's just odd because you kind of would have thought some of the Clippers guys would have ran out of gas.
Yeah.
Harden played 48 minutes too. And, in the overtime, he just took the game over and looked like kind of the freshest guy on the floor, even though he
Big
had,
time.
some mental mistakes earlier in the game where he had, like the behind the back pass on the just,
Yeah.
stuff like that happens in a game like that. But
Hmm.
but I guess also shout out the Clippers because again, this was a big win, and this kind of showcased why people who believe in the Clippers take them so seriously. Because most of the talk and most of the focus had been on about Golden State. The Clippers have been kind of, in the back, right? Most people have been talking about teams like LA, teams like, like the Lakers, teams like Golden State. Obviously, OKC has been, all encompassing, even Denver. But the Clippers have kind of been able to sit in the back, do their work quietly, and still get A pluses.
Hmm.
And this is the type of game where when you watch Kawhi and what he was able to do, it's kind of the case that you make for if you think the Clippers can win the West or at least be in the Western Conference Finals. This is the case to make for it, right? And because Kawhi for certain stretches looked like the best player on the floor through most of the game until Steph took over late. And then you had Harden who came in. You didn't get much from Norman Powell, but we talked about it where like one or the other could pop off and have a great game. Again, the bench gave them nothing, right? And we know that there's going to be times where teams are going to pressure them and there's going to be some issues. But I think for the Clippers, you're feeling good because you're going to play Denver in the first round. You are going to be on the road, and their road record is not great. They have a losing record on the road, but so much of the season, Kawhi didn't play, even though they were still good. And Kawhi has continued to look better and better as time goes on. And I don't think Denver's the type of team defensively that's going to be able to pick them up full court and pressure them and kind of force them to make mistakes. Zubac can be a guy. Again, we don't have to talk too much about the matchup yet, but just as a whole, coming out of this game, obviously whoever won the game would be coming out looking great. But like you said, if Golden State won, there's a chance that they're playing the Lakers in the first round. And not that they believe that they're going to lose, because they probably feel like they can beat anybody. But just as a whole, if you're the Clippers, you're definitely looking at Denver. And I think you can feel like if Kawhi can play this well and the Nuggets don't really have like a ton of perimeter guys that can slow down their guards, you still have Zubac who can do something. You have a real chance to win, this first round matchup. Now you got to play OKC in the second round, so that could be a nightmare, but you just never know with the way that Kawhi has looked as the season has gone on. He's been incredible.
Yeah, I love that both of the, potential spoiler teams got to duke it out for like the final playoff spot pretty much. And I love that, and they're both so experienced, the Warriors and Clippers. And, like you said, the Clippers could easily spoil the Nuggets season. And I think the Warriors could potentially spoil Houston's as well. And, I'm curious what the final
Right.
1 through 8 is going to really look like, for the playoffs, and we can talk about every single matchup. But as it's looking right now, it's shaping up to be peak.
Yeah, exactly. And can't say quite as the same for the Eastern Conference. I do think we're gonna have, some cool matchups. Like I said, their bracket had already wrapped up, but I guess in terms of other regular season matchups, that was kind of the big one. So I guess if you want, we can probably move over, to the East, and I guess we can start with the play in there and then kind of just work our way up.
Sure thing.
So we're gonna have, in the play in, we're gonna have the Magic and the Hawks as the 7-8. Winner would play the Celtics, and then you have the Bulls and the Heat in the 9-10 again. And then the winner of that would play the loser. People know how the play-in works, right? 7-8 winner plays the 2 seed. Loser plays the winner of 9-10. Whoever wins that is the 8 seed. So, I mean, this one is not really that crazy interesting, and I think part of it has to do with, at least from a Magic and Hawks perspective, they're just not good enough. And part of that hurt them is they have key guys that are done for the season, right? Like Jalen Suggs was gone a long time ago. He hadn't played a whole lot this season anyways, but, he had that season-ending injury where he's not coming back. And then Mo Wagner tore his ACL, and that's made them a worse team. They were already not a great offensive team, even though they've been really good defensively. The nice thing is Paolo has caught fire. He's been playing much better since he came back from his injury. So that's great to see, and that's a good sign. And then for the Hawks, kind of a similar thing. Jalen Johnson, season-ending injury, so he's not coming back. They've actually played okay, I guess, since Johnson's been hurt. Still not great. They have a losing record. But the return they got back for the trade deadline, those guys have kind of helped them, and they're playing well. Risa Shea's been really good, who they drafted. Okongwu's been in the starting center. He's been really good. And some of the bench guys have helped them out as well. But I don't know. I feel like there's not a whole lot to talk about here because I don't see any of these teams having a real shot at pulling off a first-round upset because you're playing Cleveland and Boston. Both teams won over 60 games.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and they're really good. Those are 2 of the 3 best teams in the NBA. So, and also the Magic and the Hawks are not healthy. I mean, I guess you could argue the Bulls and the Heat aren't necessarily either, but I don't see any of those teams having a real chance. I feel like the bracket either stays the same or Atlanta swaps 7 and then Orlando's 8.
Yeah.
Maybe if Orlando has a crappy offensive game in one of them or 2 of them, maybe the Bulls or the Heat take them, but I feel like 7-8 is probably going to either be the same or it's going to flip.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't foresee any upsets or anything like that. I don't foresee anything crazy happening like that. But at the end of the day, I think it's good experience for the young team like Orlando and, good experience for the guys on Atlanta as well, even Chicago included, I would say. So, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, the Magic and the Bulls have been, the 2 best performing teams as of late of that 4, right? They're both 7-3 in their last 10. So maybe the Bulls have an explosive offensive performance. Maybe Kobe White gets hot. Maybe Josh Giddey goes off or something like that. I mean, like last year, right? It was the Hawks and the Bulls, I think, in one of the playing games, and the Bulls destroyed Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yep.
I mean, stuff like that can happen because it's one game, but not a whole lot of interest there. And then I guess we'll get into the Western plan once we get more to the West. But then as we look in the East, 3-6 looks like we're gonna have Knicks Pistons in the first round. 4-5 is a rematch, Pacers Bucks, except I think now the Pacers have home court, right, where they did not last year. And then, the Celtics and Cavs wait for whoever comes out of the play-in.
Yeah. I mean,
Hmm?
if you want me to be honest, I mean, do
Mhm.
you want to delve into like these matchups and previews and stuff, or do you want to just, move on to regular season wrap ups?
We might as well
All
maybe
right.
talk maybe a ton. I think we probably want to do a full breakdown the next episode, but at least just like maybe touch on it a little bit. Like, Knicks Pistons are going to be playing each other. I think the Pistons were able to get 2 wins on the Knicks, right? So I think they
Yeah.
were able to kind of play them even in that season matchup. Again, I guess the question for the Knicks, as we talked about when we did our X factors, is the other guys outside of Brunson and Towns, what do they look like? Because Anunoby's been really good for what, a month or so long stretch,
Mm-hmm.
and then Hart, his jump shot is kind of gone from him, but at least Anunoby's kind of making up for that. Mitchell Robinson's back, so I guess that helps. So, they're going to be a little bit deeper, but then the Pistons we know can be a physical team. Cade Cunningham's been fantastic, right? All season. I think he's going to be all NBA guy. I think you believe that too. We
Yep.
both had him on our all NBA list.
Mm-hmm.
And they do have a bevy of role players that could get hot from 3. So there is kind of a case where maybe the Pistons get hot. The Knicks, in theory, have more experience, right? I mean, some of these guys were on the team last year. Not all of them, but some of them. And even the guys who weren't have been in other playoff games. Mikal Bridges and Towns have been in playoff games before, right? So you would think this favors the Knicks. I think the Pistons can put up a fight, but I do feel like the Knicks should be favored and should win this series. And I think if they didn't, I think that would be pretty disappointing, I would say.
Yeah, I got Knicks in 6. That's the short spiel,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah, I would say so too.
Yeah.
Then Pacers Bucks. I think this one is kind of a little quirky to figure out because both teams have been playing pretty well to close out the season in the last 10 games. I think the Pacers schedule has been a little bit more difficult. But they've also had some other easy matchups there too. But the big thing is Halliburton is back. He's been playing great. All their other guys have also found ways to play off him really well. Like you're getting great production from guys like Siakam and what's his Neesmith,
Yeah, Aaron.
Mathurin, right? I mean, it's the same, very similar team from last year, right? Where it's still very deep. And they have a couple other young guys that have gotten minutes and have played better. Like Jarvis Walker didn't really play much last year. He's played more for them and he's been pretty solid. And now you just kind of see what you're going to get from there. But with the Bucks, the thing is you're going to have the best player, right? Because you do have Giannis, who's been on a ridiculous tear. But the thing is, we still don't really know the update with Damian Lillard. And that's kind of something that I'm kind of wondering about. Maybe you could make the case that maybe the Bucks don't need him for this matchup. I mean, I think you would like to have him just because it's another good, consistent sort of offense to go to. You could make the case that maybe, I guess, there's quote unquote fewer guys to attack. But I think Lillard, when he was healthy, was really good this season.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I think he can still kind of find ways to get off against that Indiana team. I think if he's healthy, I think the Bucks should be favored to win this series. But without knowing a ton about when he can come back, it's kind of hard to completely favor them, even though the standings are close. But what do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, it's a weird one because Dame is going to be potentially absent, and I think most likely will be. And I still have to give the edge to Milwaukee if I'm going to be real. I think Giannis is, season. He's not going to go out sad like that in the first round. I understand, their personnel surrounding Giannis isn't, the best, and it's not, by any means ideal, but regardless, I think Giannis is just going to tear it up for however many games it takes to get Indy out of there. But I think it's going to be a dogfight because I think Indiana's not just a pushover team. Like now they've really
Right.
found their
50
groove.
wins.
Exactly, they found their groove. It's not just Halliburton. You have Siakam. You have a bunch of guys who can do a lot of damage on the offensive end. It's just going to be a matter of consistency for them. Are they going to be able to do it again in a 7-game series against Milwaukee with Giannis? Who knows?
Mhm.
But I'm still going to favor Milwaukee on this one.
I think I'm going to take Milwaukee too.
All right,
I
cool.
mean, I think it's kind of the scenario where the Pacers might be the better team,
Hmm.
but I think the Bucks have the best player. And remember, Giannis didn't play against the Pacers at all in the playoffs last year,
Exactly.
and he's another guy who can be kind of a terror in the postseason. So
Kinda.
I think, yeah, exactly.
He
So
is.
I think that might be a problem for the Pacers, and to some of those guys, bless you, to some of the guys' credit on the Bucks, like some of them have played well, but I guess the question is, how much can you trust some of those bench guys come playoff time? Can you trust Kevin Porter Jr. to basically be like a 6-man
No.
scoring guy off the bench? Can you? Bobby Portis is back, so that's nice. That's kind of a guy that's been a pretty consistent contributor for them. It's just tough because I do wonder where are you going to get the other sources of offense outside of Giannis consistently to keep up with the Pacers, right? Who also can, score. I mean, they're what, ninth in offensive rating? I mean, the Bucks are 10th. So, but again, some of these stats are kind of skewed based off of what some of these teams were doing earlier in the season versus later in the season because we know both of these teams were not very good to begin the year,
Hmm.
right? And they've since picked it up and have since rebounded and bounced back. But I think that's the thing is we didn't see Giannis last year, and I think that kind of changed what that whole matchup looked like versus if he's out there this time around, I think they can take him.
Oh yeah.
It's just a matter of, they're going to have to do it on the road, which is different than being at home, and the Bucks 500 on the road. So that's not ideal. But if they can steal one game in Indiana, which is going to be tough because they're insane at home, they're 29-11. If
Yep.
they can steal one game, I think they can win that series. I think,
Yeah.
and it's like we said, it's got to be one of the first two. So I'm going to take them to win. Um, I'll give them 6.
All right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Then after that, don't know the other matchups, but we can go into the West, look at the play in there. So we got 7, 8, 9, 10. 7, 8, Golden State, Memphis. I don't feel like I need to say a lot here. I mean, I'm gonna take Golden State to win that game. I know they had a really tough. Loss to the Clippers, but I think they've had Memphis's number as we've talked about. Everybody's had their number, 4-6 in their last 10, seemingly incapable of beating good teams. And I think Golden State's going to be ticked off, and they're going to be super motivated to win that game. My only concern is Butler. Is he hurt? Is he going to be able to play? If he plays, what can he give them? Does Kaminga play? Does he have to replace Butler? I don't know.
He should.
But I think you have to take Golden State in that game. But playoff or playing games are kind of tough to figure out because again, it's one game. Because we've seen scenarios where, again, we look at last year, right? Both of us thought that Golden State would handle Sacramento in that 9-10 playing game, maybe the first 9 or be the first 10 seed to get in. Didn't happen. I think the first time they were in the play-in, right, against the Lakers, right? They were right there with LA when most people thought the Lakers, I think, would kind of curb stomp them, and it didn't happen, right? I mean, the Lakers still won. LeBron hit the 3, but they gave them all they could give them, and then they lose to Memphis in overtime when most people thought they would beat Memphis because they were at home.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always work out like that. And then what was it? The Pelicans made the playoffs as a 9 seed or whatever they were when they had like 30 something wins and made the playoffs. So I think anything's possible, I guess, in these playing games. Because again, you could just have an outlier game. What if Ja hits like 18 threes or something like that? I guess we've seen things happen, but I think it's kind of hard to bet against Golden State in this game, even though I guess technically they are winless in the play-in. But I think that they have advantages over Memphis. I just don't see how Memphis stops them because I just think you got too many guys that aren't great defenders. Now without Brandon Clark, you don't really have an option to go small, and if you do go small, you don't have enough rebounding, or anything else. I don't like that for Memphis. I think that's a really tough scenario to be in, especially with how poorly they've played. Even with the new coach, it hasn't mattered
Yeah.
against good teams at least.
And Golden State's defense is very freaking good. So
Yeah.
I doubt Memphis will, pop off or anything like that. So I'm choosing Golden State as well.
Yeah, then we have the 9-10 matchup. This one is a little tricky. This might be the trickiest one of all because with the Kings, they can pop off in any game. Levine and DeRozan could have 80 in a game. We've seen it before. They don't have a ton of defense to work with. It's kind of interesting, right? Because they're without Malik Monk, right? I think he got hurt in a game, so he's going to be out, I think, at least a couple of weeks. So they're kind of having to be more reliant on those guys. Because for a while, it looked like maybe there's too many go-to guys offensively. Now it's a little bit more simplified. They are 7th in offensive rating, but defensive rating, they are 22nd, right? So that's the part that's a little bit tough. I guess, if you want to look at the last 15 games, 15th offensive rating, and then defensive rating, they're 24th. So they've not been very good the last 15 games. So that's not ideal. But then for the Mavs, you can make the case, well, they have the best player, presumably, if he's healthy, Anthony Davis, right? He's a guy that, in theory, the Kings front line probably shouldn't bother him, right? Because, it's Sabonis, Trey Lyles, Keegan Murray, Jonas Valanciunas, right? Like either guys that are not big enough or guys who aren't quick enough, right? So I think that's the scenario where he could pop off. But then you also look at they don't have a lot of great options at guard. So who's the guy that's going to get him the ball, right? Because in the last few games I've seen, they're not even running a point guard in the starting 5. It's like Najee Marshall.
Yeah.
So, the Mavs are going to have a lot of size, but I just my question is, are they going to be able to score? And that's kind of the question that I'm going to have. This one is a tough one to pick between the two. Like, I want to lean Sacramento, but, like, at the same time, I don't know. Because, like, maybe something could happen with the Mavs, but, I just think with the perimeter offense, with LaVine and DeRozan, if those guys get hot, I don't know if Dallas can keep up. And that's kind of the concern where it feels like you might have to have a slight lean towards Sacramento. I guess they'll be at home. Haven't really been good at home. Dallas has been terrible on the road. So probably lean Sacramento, I would say.
Yeah, in the short, I outright said Sacramento, and I'm going to stick by it. I think, they do have the weapons. They do have the guys that you can really go to, I think, when it counts. And, you do have Sabonis as well, who's severely underrated. But at the same time, you do look at Dallas, and they do have Anthony Davis. So I think that's going to be the key is, who's going to be the best player on the floor. And who's going to have the best team effort as well. But I think Sacramento's a little bit more put together offensively, and I think that's probably going to be the difference maker in a 1-game scenario. If it's 7 games, I'd probably take Dallas, but since it's 1 game, I would take Sacramento.
Yeah, just I think ideally it's like which team is probably better on both ends of the floor. Which team has maybe a higher offensive ceiling? Maybe. I know Memphis's offensive ceiling might be higher than Golden State's, but like you said, I think Golden State's defense is better. But for the Kings, I think that because of the perimeter offense, I think they might be able to just get hot.
Yep.
And it just kind of turns into a quick game. But I could be wrong.
It
wouldn't surprise me if Dallas won, I guess is what I'm saying, because I could see AD having a big game, but it feels like it might be lean Kings, but I'm like kind of slight lean, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Mavs won. But the problem is, can they get out of that matchup? And I would say the answer is probably not.
No.
So that's why for me, 7-8 probably will stay the same in the Western Conference is my guess. Maybe Memphis has a stupid game against the Kings or the Mavs, but they've been fine against the bad team. So both of those teams should be able to take care of business and stay in the 7-8. But again, being in the play-in is still kind of a scary thing.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Now we can move into these West matchups. Again, we only have a couple that are set. So we did talk about Nuggets Clippers a little bit. So I guess we'll probably start with Lakers Wolves. So that one's 3-6. What do we think about this matchup? Because for the Wolves, obviously it's kind of been a tale of 2 seasons, right? Because obviously you have last year, they had the big team that went to the Western Conference Finals with Edwards and Towns and Gobert and everyone else. Then they make a big trade, swap Towns and Randall. They also bring in DiVincenzo. Not very good to start off the year. Takes a while. They eventually figure it out, right, where they're starting to win a lot of games. But then right at the end, they have a couple of back-breaking losses that could have vaulted them potentially into the top 4, right? So they're still going to be 6, right? But you could have been in the 4 spot where you could have played potentially the Nuggets. And I think that's the kind of case that we made where, like, if it was them in the first round, it'd be hard to not take Minnesota given how that matchup is. This one, I think, could possibly be a 50-50. I think if you're LA, I think you probably feel a little happy that Golden State probably didn't win that play-in game Not that you can't beat Golden State, but I do think we've seen with LA when they play bigger teams, they tend to do better. They tend to be able to win even when they go small. They're not that small. They're just a little bit slow. But you factor in some of the personnel, and then you kind of look at Randall. What does he do? Because we know he's kind of been an up and down postseason player. Gobert could potentially be a problem because you don't really have a ton of bigs to really keep him off the boards. But then you can flip it around and say Luka, Austin, or LeBron take turns trying to take him off the dribble, in a switch. And I think that's really the big thing that it comes down to. I think if the Lakers' three guys are able to do what they've been doing as of late, where they're seemingly getting 80-plus points combined every game, taking guys off the dribble, being able to create good shots and good offense for everybody, they should win this series. They're also insane at home. They are 31-10, and I think that's the advantage there for them. And the role players will be key too. If guys like Gabe Vincent and Dorian Finney-Smith can knock down the open shots they get, they should win this series. And I think, again, with them being at home, I think you do have to favor them. And for the Wolves, there are some ways that they can take this series too. They can use their defense. Maybe they can pressure these guys and force them into turnovers. Maybe their size can overwhelm them. Maybe Ant has a crazy series where he pops off. But my other concern is without having like a true decision maker distributor, if it gets tight, I don't know how much I can really trust Minnesota unless Ant just pops off and has a great series, which he could have. But I think if you're the Lakers, I think you gotta be happy with the matchup you got, and I think they're gonna be favored, and I think they're gonna win this matchup.
Yeah, I agree. The only way that Minnesota can win this matchup is if Ant averages like 40 points. There's no, I don't really see like a route where he plays normal and they come out of that series alive. I think LA is too potent on both ends of the floor alongside, having home court. It's just a little bit too much. So unfortunately, the Timberwolves will probably be a first round exit, which I don't think, a lot of people are too happy about considering where the team was last year.
Right.
But, we're here now and, LA's the third seed for a reason. And I think, they're going to show Minnesota and humble them, I think, on this one.
You think it goes 6 or 7?
Yeah, that's going to be really contingent, I think, on Anthony Edwards. Like, in all honesty, it could go like 5. Like, realistically, I'll say Lakers in 5. Not even for the meme or anything like that. That's just how I genuinely feel.
Yeah, I'll go 6. Okay. I'll give Minnesota a couple of games, but I'm with you where I think I'm not saying Minnesota can't win the matchup. Like, any of these teams, in theory, can beat any of these guys, right? Because their records are so close. But I think for the Lakers, I think you got to favor the high-end talent. You got 2 guys that could be the best player in this series. Then you have that third guy, Austin Reeves, right, where if he pops off, he could be really good. And who do they put on who? And, again, I think there's the potential for, we saw last year, right, in the series with Dallas and the Wolves, right, where Gobert was playing, but there were a lot of stretches where he was putting in the switches against perimeter guys, and, it's not his fault. Most centers can't do that, but putting them out there just, makes your defense worse, right? I mean, that's kind of the issue there because then guards can take him off the dribble. And that's the thing, I think, what we've seen from Luka and LeBron as of late is they've been better at beating guys off the dribble than they were, especially when Luka first was a Laker, and then LeBron pre-injury was fine. And then initially when he came back from his injury, he looked a little bit slower, but he's been a lot better as of late. He did look like he might have tweaked something in that Rockets game, but going to have a week off, and then they'll play Minnesota, which I think they'll be okay with.
Yep.
And I think we're probably in the same boat on that matchup. Now, this one, 4-5, Nuggets-Clippers. We already kind of talked about it a little bit, where we said Clippers are on the road, not been a particularly great road team. But the Nuggets have not been quite as good at home as they have been in previous seasons. Obviously, new coach. I mean, I guess he's an assistant, so he was already there, but they did get rid of Mike Malone and the GM. They are undefeated since that point. Again, I don't think the teams that they've played against have been too crazy. I mean, they did beat Houston. Give them credit there. They beat Memphis. Give them credit there. But in the games when I'm watching them play outside of that last game, it didn't really feel like they looked significantly better. I think part of it was, some of what we're seeing is like, say, Westbrook's not playing as much, and you're not blaming him, but like it doesn't feel like there's a ton of differences. And some of the guys are just playing with a little bit more energy, and that's where you do probably give credit to the new coach. And Murray's back. But I think the question is, as we talked about, is how healthy is he? Because he's still looked a little bit off since coming back from injury. And I don't know if I can trust that, right? Because he had a long stretch where he was getting better and better. Then he gets kind of upended by the injury. And I just don't know if I can bank on him going right back to what he was before he got hurt. And if he's not, you might have to pick the Clippers in this matchup. But if he is healthy, then that you might have to give the edge to Denver. But like I said, my concern is that, again, we know Harden has been a guy that's not been great in the postseason, but this should be a matchup where he shouldn't have really too many issues. You know what I mean? Like, just who's going to be guarding him if you're the Clippers that you're worried about him getting shut out by? I mean, really the only option, I guess, is Christian Brown, maybe Peyton Watson potentially, right? But I feel like he's more like a helper than like just a pure one-on-one lockdown defender. So what do you think of this matchup? Because based off of how both teams have been playing for the latter part of the season, it feels like the Clippers should be favored in this series and should probably win. But are we actually going to say that Denver's done and that they're dead? Because Jokic the other day said maybe they woke up the beast. So do we think that the beast is woken up? Or do we think that it's more likely that the beast just had a little bit of a, hiatus, maybe came back for a little bit, and now, we'll see. Probably not. What do you think?
I think it comes down to who's going to be the best duo on the court, and I think I'm still going to take Denver on this one. I think, Jokic and Jamal Murray, I think they'll show up. I think they'll show up in the first round. Beyond that, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think Denver should still be very scared of what Kawhi Leonard can do when fully healthy. We just saw it in the final, game of the regular season. Imagine having to deal with that in a 7-game series alongside, Harden. But that's where I think I'm teetering, is because I think Jamal Murray will probably outplay James Harden. And if that happens, I think that's where the Clippers might lose. But they do have, some depth on that team, which I think it makes them also a little bit scarier. They're not really, I guess, a 5 seed, because imagine if Kawhi was healthy the entire season. I think we might be talking about them a little bit differently. Maybe the numbers all around the team look a little different, but at the end of the day, I think they'd still be probably better than a 5th seed. So that's, I think, where it might be a little bit of a catfish on the Clippers end, but I still think Jokic is just going to outplay Kawhi, and I think Jamal Murray will outplay Harden.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they did win 50 games despite Kawhi not playing a ton. I think the real X factor for the Clippers is definitely Norman Powell.
I agree.
In the 4 games that he played against the Nuggets, he averaged almost 30 a game. And basically 54 from the field, 49 from 3. So this is kind of what we talked about where, okay, maybe Harden has a rough stretch, because if you look at his splits against Denver, they're not that great. Like, he's shot the ball like under 40%, but also for most of the season, he's not shot the ball crazy well, even though he's been impactful. But Powell is the guy that offensively you might be really worried about if you're the Nuggets, because I think unlike Harden, I think his combination of speed and physicality off the dribble and just his timing for hitting tough shots. I mean, think about it. We didn't even think about this as we were talking, but I remember it right at the end of the first half against Golden State. Norman Powell hits a pull-up 3 from like 35 or whatever,
double
with
team.
Double teamed.
Yeah.
And I don't usually like kind of saying like, if this happens, then this happens. I mean, then this doesn't happen, because you never know. It's so many possessions, but tie game right at the end. He doesn't make that shot. Maybe they're down 3. Who knows? But either way, that's kind of the guy that I would be really worried about if I'm Denver. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, where it's the fact that you have 2 perimeter guys that could cook you, and you still have Kawhi, and you still have Zubac to worry about. Yeah. And that's kind of where, I don't know, this is kind of like a 50-50 one for me. I think I need to see Jamal Murray healthy. I think if he is healthy, I think they do win this series, even though I think it's going to be a dogfight. But if he's not healthy, I don't know. But then you still got to ask yourself about Kawhi, right? Because we know last season the Clippers were great. Then he gets hurt towards the latter part of the season, and then we don't see him again. I mean, he played 2 games, but he looked like a shell of himself. Then we didn't see him again at all. So that's the part where, can you trust that? I mean, considering he's played less than some of these other guys, you would think he should have a decent amount in the tank. But I think like you said, I think the tough part is it's hard to win a series if you don't have the best player, unless the other team is just significantly better. I think
Hmm.
the Clippers have been the better team the second half of the season. It just kind of comes down to, can Jokic still get his and dominate? Maybe Zubac has something to say about that, because that would be another concern. Can he really stop Zubac? I mean,
Probably
I don't
not.
know. Yeah, so that's kind of the issue there. It really comes down to, I think, is there anybody off the bench for either team that can do anything?
Nope.
Because if the answer is yes, that probably tips the series to them. And like you said, who is it? I mean, might maybe Bogdanovich. I mean, he stunk against Golden State, but could he hit some shots against Denver? I mean, maybe, probably. So, and that's kind of the only guy, right? None of the other bench guys for the Clippers are really guys who can catch fire. I mean, Derek Jones Jr., is kind of like he gets left open and kind of just gets opportunities, but you're not necessarily feeding him, perimeter shots, right?
Right.
So, I don't know. This one's kind of a 50-50 for me. But I guess for you just feel like even though the Clippers have been a lot better, you still probably trust Denver to pull out that series win.
Yes, I would say Nuggets in 7.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna go Nuggets in 7 too.
Okay.
I think it's tough. Like when you say in 7, it's a coin flip,
Hmm.
right? Like I mean, I think did either of us say Denver in 7 against the Wolves last year? I think I said 6.
I think we both said 6.
Okay. All right. So yeah, but either way, like when you get to 6 or at least or 7 for sure,
Hmm.
it's a coin flip. Like I guess what I'm saying is it would not shock me if the Clippers won this
I
series
agree.
at all. You know what I mean? Like I'm gonna favor Denver a tiny bit, but it's teetering because I just need to see Jamal Murray be good. If he's not good, I don't know how Denver is gonna be able to have enough, for the Clippers. But who knows? I mean, you just never know.
I agree.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the matchups for now because we're still kind of waiting for the other playing games, and we already talked about those. But yeah, what a regular season, I guess. We can kind of probably wrap this up more so by just talking about the regular season in its totality. One of the better ones I think I can remember, just from the perspective of course, you had the teams going into the season that I think most of us were already very high on. We were high on OKC. We were high on Boston. We liked Cleveland. We didn't expect them to go 64-18, but we certainly thought they'd be good. I think we liked New York. Of course, you look out west, we like Dallas and some of these other teams, but a lot of change, a lot of turmoil, a lot of ups and downs, right? There were teams that most people kind of considered dead, right, going into the season. Actually, it's funny because I remember looking back at our over-unders, um, didn't do amazing on them, but we did, it's funny for a team like the Lakers, we actually picked the over on them because I think our case was maybe they could win 50 games if LeBron and AD are healthy. Little did we know they'd make trades to kind of change the outlook of the team. But, we did get that one. Denver, I think we expected to be better. I think we didn't expect them to be in the 4 seed. I think we expected them to be at worst 3. I mean, of course, they tied with the Lakers in terms of wins, but I think we thought they'd be in that 2-3 spot, right?
Hmm.
Like, where Houston is, I think we thought that's where Denver would be. I think we knew OKC would be the 1 seed. I think we were hoping for Denver or thinking that Denver would be in that 2 spot right there with them.
Hmm.
Clippers, we definitely thought were dead. I think that's one we have to take on the chin, right?
Yeah.
They're over under with the 30s. They
Yep.
ended up getting 50 wins with Kawhi not playing a ton.
Yep.
We expected Minnesota to take a step back. Golden State's another one that I think we kind of whiffed on. I think we were just lower on them potentially making a trade. I think if we had kind of automatically known they were going to make a trade, then we probably would have picked
Hmm.
over. I just didn't know because I didn't know who was out there that they were looking for. They got Butler and they've been a lot better. Um, their thing is weird because they're in the play-in. I mean, of course, it could all work out fine, and they play Houston in the first round and win. And then maybe play, who's fatigued between LA and Minnesota. Memphis is another one because I mean, we thought that we thought they'd be like a top 4 seed too, right?
Yeah.
And they ended up being that for most of the year and then forgot how to play defense the second half of the season and now they're in the play-in. So, I think really most of the drama was in the Western Conference because in the East, most of the teams that were good stayed good. I mean, of course, a couple of teams took a little bit of a tumble. The Bucks and Pacers kind of whiffed early, but then closed strong. Pistons were great. They were better than I think pretty much anybody thought. Orlando was a little bit of a disappointment, but really because of injuries. Atlanta was a pleasant surprise. But yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing is that we had the trades that happened at the deadline, so many of them, because I think there were a lot of teams that felt like we do have a real chance. And I think there's a lot of teams that can say that. Like only one team can still win it at the end of the season. But, I think you can kind of feel like it's open. I mean, my pick hasn't changed. I still do have the Celtics, but I don't know if the Celtics are going to win, right? I know there was reporting about Jaylen Brown, I think has to have pain injections in his knee, if I'm not mistaken. So if he's a lesser version of himself, maybe a little hard to trust Boston, unless, I guess maybe you'll have a healthy Porzingis. Maybe you won't. We don't know. And then with OKC, as dominant as they've been in the regular season, will we see it in the postseason? Think the nice thing if you're them is hopefully you don't get a crazy first round matchup. I think you're kind of hoping that Golden State wins. I don't think you want to play Golden State in the first round. Not that they can't win, but it's not ideal. It's not an ideal scenario to be in. But, just a great regular season. And I think especially with the way that the latter part of the regular season went, where there were so many must-win games for all these teams and the level of effort and intensity ramped up for a lot of teams that clearly wanted it down the stretch, it made a lot of this regular season really meaningful because, especially, I mean, look at the standings, right? Like, say with the Knicks and Pacers, they were separated by one game. So if either of those teams have, one extra loss, I mean, like think about Indiana, right? You lost 2 games to LA, one in which LeBron and Luka didn't play. Austin Reeves had 45. Then you had another game where LeBron tips the ball in at the buzzer, right?
Yep.
Those are 2 games that you probably didn't expect to lose. And you lost both of them, right? Where they could have been the 3 seed. And then don't even get me started on the West, where you got 3 teams with the same record, right? And all of those teams had at least 3 or 4 games where they just blew, right? Where it's like, you should not have lost this game. I mean, think about it. Like, even the Lakers, right, had some games that they blew where maybe they're the 2 seed, right? Obviously, LeBron getting hurt is another factor as well. But then you look at Denver losing to the Wizards twice. I mean, that's pretty rough, including, one basically right at the buzzer.
Mm-hmm.
Then you look at the Wolves sitting in 6, and you had a game where you were up 20 against the Bucks in the 4th quarter, right? And then, of course, if you're Denver, you think about the blown game to Minnesota, right? Where, you foul, Russ misses the layup and then fouls the Nickeil Alexander-Walker for 3 right at the end. Look at Golden State. Same thing. They had a lot of games earlier in the season before the trade, right? Where, they didn't have enough talent to close out a lot of those games. But then, even after the trade, they were great, but then they just had a few too many games that they ended up blowing. I mean, again, one extra win would have kept them in 6, right? Just one. So if you don't lose to the Spurs or, lose to any of the other teams you can think of that they lost to, even post Jimmy Butler trade, I mean, you're out of the play-in. So, that's kind of the tough part with a lot of these teams, but I still think it provided for a great regular season drama. And now we get to see what the playoffs look like, with all of these teams that are going to be vying for a chance to try to win the championship.
Yeah, I think post All-Star break was phenomenal. I enjoyed every minute of, all
Mm-hmm.
the ball that we were able to watch. And, I think the seedings as they are, I think no matter what the play and outcome is going to be, I think, we're in for a show. I think for both conferences, we could get, some potential rematches that, a lot of teams have some stuff to prove. We got some new duos, new trios that, have some stuff to prove as well. And I don't think there's like a super consensus like this team is going to win the title, going into the
Right.
the playoffs here. So I think that's where the beauty of this thing is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's been a great regular season, and there's had been so much talk about the ratings, and then it's kind of funny because a lot of the top viewed games of the season were kind of later on, right? Like
Mhm.
I think what was it? The Luka return to Dallas, right? I think that was the most watched non-Christmas game in a minute,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because everybody, and that was a game, that had implications beyond just Luka's return. That had playoff implications for the Lakers, right?
Yes,
They don't
sir.
win that game, they're not the 3 seed, right?
Yep.
They're in that 6 spot basically, right? Or
Yep.
yeah, exactly. They're in that 6 spot. So,
Mhm.
that's kind of how this goes. And like you said, I think most people do have a pick for who they think will win the title, but like you said, it's not complete consensus,
Yep.
right? Like we understand that there are 360-win teams in the league this season, which was not the case last year. But it wouldn't be shocking, right, if say Cleveland went out, not in the first round, but it wouldn't be shocking if the Cavs didn't make the finals.
Right.
I don't think it'd be shocking to a lot of people if OKC didn't make the finals. I think it'd be surprising given the record, given how dominant they've been in the regular season. But people have already made the case that, hey, look at how they played against some of those other teams down the stretch, right? Now, how much of that is very little to play for versus like, actual signs that there may be some cracks in the armor, so to speak. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, I think matchups wise, it's shaping up to be a great postseason. And I think it's going to be really exciting. Have you changed your pick at all? Like, are you sticking with your initial pick?
I'm sticking with my initial pick.
All right, and that was the Knicks, right?
Yeah, I can't really jump ship on it. Like in the back of my head, I'd love to because I don't think they had the best season. Statistically, numbers wise, I think record wise, even as well. But I mean, I think they have a somewhat of a fighting chance. Things are going to have to go their way. For sure, in both conferences for that to happen, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm still gonna stick with my pick, the Celtics. I'm still mad that I changed it last year, but either way, it's a new year.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and then out west, given the craziness of the West, you still think OKC is getting out of there alive?
Yep, I think they do it. Too much talent.
I think so too. All right. Well, I mean, I guess we'll close it out by reading a comment that we did get in our previous last episode that we wrote. And it comes from, looks like, what is it? Keith Wells -QP3GD. And it says SGA MVP. And this was in relation to our last episode where we doled out our awards over the course of the season. You can check that out if you want to see what we said. And we both did say SGA for MVP. Looks like he concurs.
Yeah, 100%. Advanced analytics, record-wise, best player on the best team in the NBA right now. I think they're real. I mean, it's not like Jokic has no case. That's the cool thing is like,
Right.
it's really a down to the wire kind of MVP race, and you look at both of these guys and you see how valuable they are to each other's teams, and even Giannis as well. As an honorable mention, throwing him in there. But I think Shea kind of just takes the cake. Look at the impact and the net rating of that team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, that pretty much concludes this episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, by the time we have our next episode, we'll be getting closer to seeing some play in action. We will try, if we can, schedule permitting, to post some of these play-in and playoff games so that way we can discuss and talk about the playoffs with you. It's been a long time since we've done this, right? But we would like to kind of get it going again and kind of discuss with everybody and come and join us because we've usually had a great time in all those live streams.
Mm-hmm.
They've always been incredibly fun.
Yeah.
Of course, as I've mentioned in the past, right, we always put up polls, for IG. We didn't put up one this week, but every time we do it, right, you can just kind of drop your answer in there. Usually it's kind of a yes or no thing. Sometimes it's multiple choice, whatever. And we'll kind of read it out and kind of showcase what, the people think in terms of our question. And of course, continue to like and subscribe to our videos and continue to help our content grow. We appreciate it. We'll see you next episode.